Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The Lighthouse of Lost Souls. I've always believed that the sea keeps secrets. Vast, ancient, and unfathomable secrets that mankind was never meant to discover. After what happened at Blackrock Lighthouse, I know this to be true. My name is Thomas Harding, and for 23 years I served as a lighthouse keeper along the rugged coastline of Maine. The profession was dying even when I started. Automation had already claimed most of the lighthouses in the country, but some remote locations, like Blackrock, still required a human touch. At least that's what the Coastal Authority told us. When the previous keeper at Blackrock, old Malcolm Pierce, disappeared without a trace after 30 years of service, they called me in. I'd earned a reputation as reliable, unflinching in the face of isolation. The pay was substantially better than my previous post, and the 3-month rotation meant I'd have longer stretches of time with my family afterward. It's a peculiar station, my supervisor had warned during the briefing. Sits on a small, rocky island 3 miles offshore. Weather can be brutal. Communication sometimes cuts out for days, and the locals have stories. I'd laughed at that last part. Every lighthouse has stories. Ghost ships, mermaids, drowned sailors returning from watery graves. I'd heard them all. Fiction born from isolation, storms, and the human mind's tendency to fill silence with fantasy. "I'll manage," I'd said confidently. The boat that delivered me to Blackrock on that gray November morning couldn't leave quickly enough. The young Coast Guard officer who'd piloted me over kept glancing nervously at the lighthouse as we unloaded my supplies. "Something wrong?" I'd asked him. He'd shaken his head, eyes still fixed on the white tower. "Place gives me the creeps. Had to retrieve Malcolm's belongings after. Felt like the whole time something was watching me." I'd smiled politely, chalking it up to youth and superstition. 3 months, he'd said, starting the engine. "Radio check twice daily. Emergency channel is always open." "I know the protocol," I'd replied, perhaps a bit too curtly. He'd nodded, then hesitated. "Malcolm was a good man. Experienced, whatever happened to him. Probably had a heart attack and fell into the sea," I'd said practically. "Happens in this profession." The officer had given me a long look. His logbook had some strange entries toward the end. Authority classified them. Then he'd gunned the engine and left me alone on the small, windswept dock. Blackrock Lighthouse itself was a classic design, a 110-foot cylindrical tower of whitewashed stone with the keeper's quarters built into its base. The island it stood upon was little more than a jagged outcropping of black volcanic rock, perhaps 3 acres in total, rising abruptly from the Atlantic. No trees, no beach, just rock, lichen, and the constant assault of waves. Inside, the lighthouse was surprisingly well maintained. The quarters were sparse but comfortable, a small kitchen, a study with weather monitoring equipment, a bedroom, and a bathroom. Above, a spiral staircase wound up to the lantern room where the massive Fresnel lens rotated, sending its beam sweeping across the dark waters each night. My first week passed uneventfully. I established my routine. Maintenance checks, weather observations, logbook entries, and the nightly lighting of the lamp. Though it was automated, regulations required manual verification. The isolation didn't bother me. I had books, a shortwave radio, and decades of practice being alone with my thoughts. It was during my second week that I noticed something odd. I was in the lantern room, polishing the brass fittings as the automated mechanism rotated the great lens. Through the glass, I could see a heavy fog had settled over the water, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The lighthouse's beam cut through it, creating an eerie, diffused glow. That's when I saw it, a ship's running lights, green and red, moving slowly through the fog. Nothing unusual about that, except for 2 things. The vessel wasn't showing up on my radar, and its lights seemed wrong, not electric, but with the wavering quality of old oil lamps. I grabbed the binoculars, but the fog was too thick to make out details. I noted the sighting in my logbook and thought little more of it. Radar malfunctions happen, especially in heavy weather. 3 nights later, I saw it again. This time, the fog was lighter, and I could make out more details. What I saw made no sense. It appeared to be a wooden sailing vessel, a 3-masted barquentine of a design I hadn't seen outside of maritime museums. Its sails were furled, yet it moved steadily through the water without any visible means of propulsion. I radioed the Coast Guard. Any vessels reported in my vicinity, specifically an old sailing ship, possibly a historical recreation. Negative, Blackrock. Waters are clear for 20 miles in all directions. Just the usual fishing trawlers to the south. Can you confirm on your radar? Nothing showing near you, Harding. Why, what are you seeing? I hesitated. Probably nothing. Some trick of the light. I didn't mention the ship again, though I saw it on 5 more occasions over the next week, always at night, always moving in the same direction, making a slow circuit around the island before disappearing into the darkness. Then came the night of the storm. It hit without warning, a nor'easter that hadn't appeared on any forecast. Winds howled around the tower at over 70 knots, and waves crashed against the rocks with such force that spray reached the lantern room windows over 100 feet above sea level. I was checking the emergency generator when I heard it, a ship's bell, clear and distinct despite the howling wind. It rang in a pattern I recognized from my naval days, the distress signal. Rushing to the lantern room, I scanned the churning waters with binoculars. There, no more than half a mile out, was the sailing vessel, listing badly in the massive waves. Its mainmast had snapped, and figures moved frantically on its deck. I grabbed the radio. "Coast Guard, this is Blackrock Lighthouse. Vessel in distress, bearing 45 degrees, half-mile out. Appears to be a sailing ship taking on water." Static answered me. "Coast Guard, do you copy?" "Emergency on channel 16. More static than a broken transmission. Rock, can't, signal, repeat." The storm had knocked out communications. I was on my own. I made a decision that would change my life forever. I would attempt a rescue. The lighthouse had an old lifeboat secured in a boathouse on the leeward side of the island. It was meant for my evacuation in an emergency, not for rescuing others, but I couldn't stand by and watch people drown. Donning foul-weather gear, I fought my way down the tower and across the island, the wind threatening to throw me into the sea with each step. The boathouse was partially flooded, but the lifeboat, a sturdy 16-foot craft with a small engine, seemed intact. What I did next was against all protocol, against all common sense. I launched into those murderous waves, the small engine straining against the current as I pointed the bow toward the distressed vessel. It took 20 minutes of fighting the sea to reach the ship. Up close, it was even more anachronistic, a wooden vessel that belonged to another century. Its hull was weathered beyond what any restoration project would allow, the wood dark and twisted like it had been underwater for years. "Ahoy!" I shouted, bringing my boat alongside. "I'm from the lighthouse. Tie off and prepare to abandon ship." The figures on deck moved toward the railing. In the storm's darkness and through the driving rain, I couldn't make out their features clearly. One threw down a rope which I secured to my boat. "Come down," I yelled. One at a time, the first figure descended awkwardly, dropping heavily into my boat. In the dim light from my flashlight, I got my first clear look at one of the crew. What I saw couldn't be real. The man, if it was a man, had skin the color of wet paper, bloated and sagging. His eyes were milky white, without pupils, and his clothing was rotted, hanging from his frame in sodden strips. Seaweed was tangled in his hair and beard, and when he opened his mouth, dark water spilled out instead of words. I recoiled in horror, nearly falling overboard. This wasn't a living person. It couldn't be. More figures were descending the rope, all in the same impossible state of decay, all moving with a horrible deliberation that no living body could manage. I fumbled for the knife in my belt to cut the line, but cold, strong hands gripped my wrists. The first thing had moved with impossible speed. Its face was inches from mine, those blank eyes somehow fixed on me with terrible purpose. "Thomas Harding," it gurgled, more water spilling from its mouth with each word. "The light calls us home." It knew my name. How could it know my name? I broke free and started the engine, slashing at the rope with my knife. As it parted, more of the creatures were already climbing down, dropping into the churning sea around my boat. The vessel itself was changing before my eyes, its wooden hull rotting and breaking apart, revealing a skeletal framework that no ship could possibly stay afloat with. I gunned the engine, turning back toward the lighthouse. The storm seemed to redouble its fury, waves threatening to capsize my small craft with each swell. Through the spray and darkness, I could see shapes swimming around me too fast, too purposeful to be human. Somehow I made it back to the island. I abandoned the lifeboat, not even bothering to secure it as I scrambled onto the rocks and ran for the lighthouse. Behind me, I heard the splintering of wood as the boat was destroyed, by the rocks or by something else I didn't want to know. Inside the lighthouse, I barred the door and ran up the spiral staircase, not stopping until I reached the lantern room. The great light continued its steady rotation, oblivious to the nightmare below. Through the windows, I could see the storm was beginning to abate, the clouds breaking to reveal a moon that seemed too large, too close. Of the strange ship, there was no sign. It had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. I spent the remainder of the night in the lantern room, a flare gun in one hand and my knife in the other. When dawn finally broke, I convinced myself that exhaustion and the storm had caused me to hallucinate the entire episode. Until I checked the logbook. There in the entries from the previous keeper, Malcolm Pierce, I found this, dated 3 days before his disappearance. Ship sighted again, same position. They ring their bell in the pattern of distress, but there is no distress. They want me to come out. They know my name now. They call to me from the water below the rocks. They say the light calls them home. My hands shook as I read entry after entry. For months, Malcolm had documented sightings of the same vessel I had seen. His entries grew increasingly disturbed, filled with accounts of voices calling from the water, figures standing on the rocks during storms, and dreams of drowning while cold hands pulled him deeper. His final entry read simply, "They won't stop until I answer. God forgive me, I'm going to them tonight." I tried the radio again. This time I got through. "Coast Guard, this is Blackrock. I need to be relieved of duty immediately." "Medical emergency. Copy Blackrock. Nature of emergency." I hesitated. "Psychological. I'm not well." There was a pause. "Understood, Blackrock. Weather's clearing. We can have someone there by tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. "Not today. Afraid not. Sea's still too rough from the storm. Hold tight, Harding. One more night. I could manage one more night." I spent the day searching the lighthouse from top to bottom, looking for any additional records Malcolm might have left. In a space behind a loose stone in the basement wall, I found a small, waterproof box. Inside was a journal much older than Malcolm's logbook, its pages yellow and brittle. It was the private journal of Elijah Blackrock, the lighthouse's first keeper and the man for whom the island was named. The entries dated back to 1879. As I read, a chill settled into my bones that had nothing to do with the damp air. Elijah wrote of a ship called the Persephone, lost with all hands in a storm off the island in 1857, before the lighthouse was built. The tragedy had been the impetus for constructing the light. But according to local fishermen, the Persephone didn't rest easy. They claimed to see it on stormy nights, sailing the same route it had taken to its doom. When the lighthouse was completed, Elijah took the post of keeper. Within months, he began to see the phantom ship himself. Unlike the fishermen's fleeting glimpses, the ship appeared to him night after night, drawing closer to the island with each appearance. The crew, dead men preserved by the cold depths, eventually began to come ashore on the darkest nights. They whispered to him through the lighthouse door, through the windows, through the very walls, always the same message. "The light calls us home." Elijah discovered that the lighthouse had been built using ballast stones from the wreck of the Persephone, salvaged from the shallows where part of the ship had broken apart. The very foundation of the lighthouse contained pieces of the doomed vessel. "They believe the light is theirs," he wrote. "They think I am keeping them from it. God help me, they will not stop until they have a keeper of their own." The journal ended abruptly. Historical records showed that Elijah had been found dead in the lantern room, his body inexplicably soaked with seawater despite no evidence of flooding. The official cause was listed as heart failure. Since then, every keeper at Blackrock had experienced similar phenomena. Some requested transfers, some were dismissed for mental instability, some simply disappeared. Like Malcolm, night fell all too quickly. I lit every lamp in the keeper's quarters and turned the radio to the emergency channel, letting the static fill the silence. The beam from the lantern room swept across the now calm waters, regular as a heartbeat. At midnight I heard the bell. I climbed to the lantern room and looked out. The ship was there, closer to the island than I had ever seen it. Its decayed hull gleamed wetly in the moonlight, and figures stood motionless on its deck, all facing the lighthouse. Facing me, the radio crackled. Through the static, a voice, gurgling and thick, spoke my name. I shut it off. Something scraped against the outer wall of the lighthouse. Looking down, I saw them, the drowned crew of the Persephone, climbing the sheer stone with inhuman strength. Their bloated fingers found invisible holds in the masonry, pulling their waterlogged bodies upward with terrible purpose. I had perhaps minutes before they reached the lantern room. Frantically, I searched for a weapon, a defense, anything. My eyes fell on the logbook, on Malcolm's final words, "They won't stop until I answer." Then I understood. The crew of the Persephone weren't trying to reach the light, they were trying to reach its keeper. They needed someone to guide them home, just as a lighthouse guides ships. But home for them wasn't this world. It was whatever dark place lay beyond. They had taken Malcolm. Now they wanted me. The first of the climbing figures reached the lantern room window, its blank eyes fixed on mine as it pressed its face against the glass. Water streamed from its mouth and eyes, running down the pane. More appeared at the other windows surrounding me. I had a choice to make. I could fight, likely die in the process, or I could do what every keeper before me had eventually done: answer their call. The glass of the nearest window began to crack under the pressure of those dead hands. I made my decision. I opened the door to the gallery, the narrow walkway that encircled the lantern room outside. Wind whipped at my clothes as I stepped out. The figures paused in their climbing, watching me with those milky eyes. "I'll come with you," I said, my voice steady despite my terror. "But this ends tonight, no more keepers after me. You take me, you leave this place forever." The nearest figure inclined its head in what might have been agreement. It extended a bloated hand toward me. I took it. The skin was cold and soft, like something left too long underwater. The creature pulled me close, wrapping me in an embrace that smelled of salt and decay. Then, with surprising gentleness, it stepped off the gallery, taking me with it. We didn't fall. Instead, we drifted, slowly descending toward the water far below. The other figures followed, an escort of the drowned surrounding me as we moved not toward the rocks, but toward the waiting ship. As my feet touched the rotting deck of the Persephone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The crew moved around me with purpose now, preparing the ship to sail. The bell rang once more, not in distress, but in departure. I looked back at Blackrock Lighthouse. Its beams swept over us, through us, as if we were already gone from this world. Perhaps we were. As the phantom ship began to move away from the island, I understood what the crew of the Persephone had been seeking all these years. Not revenge, not possession of the lighthouse, but guidance. The light had been built to prevent other ships from sharing their fate, but it served another purpose for those already lost. It was a beacon showing the way to whatever lay beyond this life, a doorway they couldn't pass through without a living soul to guide them. The Coast Guard would find the lighthouse empty the next morning. They would search the island, drag the surrounding waters, and find no trace of me. Eventually, I would become another mystery of Blackrock, another keeper who vanished without explanation. But I didn't vanish. I chose this. As the island receded behind us and the ship sailed toward a horizon that seemed to bend and distort in impossible ways, I felt no fear. Only a keeper's satisfaction in fulfilling his final duty, guiding lost souls home. The ship's bell rang one last time as we crossed the threshold between worlds. The sound echoed across dimensions, across time itself. Then silence as the Persephone and her crew, myself now among them, finally found our rest. The light of Blackrock still shines, but it no longer calls to those who sailed on the Persephone. Our journey is complete, and the sea keeps its secrets, vast and unfathomable as it has always done.